grief and emotional loss can be a really interesting topic, as in the amount of things that we think that we might be grieving about, the people, if we've lost a particular person and we think that that person or thing is the thing that we're grieving, and we're very, very sure about it, because we've lost someone and the emotional pain is huge, right? What happens if you actually didn't realize that you might have been grieving about 10, 20, 30, well, I mean, maybe 10, 20 big things in comparison, maybe like 100 even tiny things. Like, we can perceive loss of anything all of the time. Let's say, I know this sounds stupid example maybe, but like, let's say I misplaced my pen. It might be a nice pen that maybe a friend gave me. And so I'm like, okay, I've now lost that pen. Am I going to be able to get it back? It's probably one of a kind that it's a present. So yeah, you might actually genuinely feel some form of loss and grief towards an inanimate object. If it was just a bog standard pen you picked up for a £5 from the shop, you might have a very different feeling about it. And then you've got, loss of moving house. When we move house and everything around us changes, that can be a huge emotional loss. It can be also emotionally positive as well. So like, there can be conflicting emotions that we basically are getting a new life, a new way of life, a different being. Maybe we went to a bigger house. We've got so many more things, but then maybe there was little things that you miss about the place that you were at. That particular view you once had, those neighbours you had that you don't get to see on a regular basis anymore, those sorts of things. And my little doggy is getting involved. He wants to come say hello, hey bird. All right, can you get down, please? All right. And pet loss, for example. I had two older dogs who we lost, and that for many people can be a massive grieving process, because it depends how the emotional connection with that animal was. And also, if we've just not learned how to deal with loss, we don't know how to deal with the emotional loss of a pet or anything in our lives. Hello, bud. What are you doing? All right, buddy. All right. It's all right. Can we get in your bed? Yeah, good boy. Good boy. So animals can play a huge part in our lives as well. And then you obviously, you can't even begin to then think about, what it might be like to lose someone so close to you, a person who was a part of your life in a huge way, on a big scale. And then obviously, if you've had compounded loss all your life, and your patterns of recognizing loss and managing loss and dealing with loss don't really add up, and you don't know how to deal with the loss of a human, and you actually have never really dealt with all the losses that otherwise happened in your life, how much would that loss compound? How much does that all sort of compound one into the other? I remember I genuinely, this made a lot of sense to me, because when I lost my friend about 12 years ago, I wasn't in a good state anyway. And I realized this massively. And I always thought losing my friend was the worst thing that happened to me. And I still believe that. But at the same time, I wasn't, my mental health and well-being was not in a good place anyway. I had things like, I broke my arm when I was very young. The divorce of my parents, for example, and all sorts of other things, like not getting on very well with my friends at school. So like, there was that constant loss of support, potentially. Loss of a constant, primary caregiver. When my dad divorced my mum and he moved out of our main home, loss of, again, when breaking my arm, it was like loss of support, emotional support, when I obviously needed it, and I didn't get it the way that I felt I needed it at that time. And all of these sort of emotions, and maybe we can call them stresses and traumas and things, anything that sort of upsets our system, are essentially forms of grief and loss. And if we can understand that actually we have just not dealt with any of these things, we've not been built to deal with them, then we can start to understand the problem. We can start to understand that actually maybe I was never equipped in the right way to deal with grief and loss. And it's completely possible to deal with grief and loss. It's just that we were just not taught how to deal with it. So you might be thinking like, I'll never get better from these feelings. And that's because you weren't taught how to deal with the feelings that you're going through. And that's completely normal and acceptable in society as it is, because like, your parents who was, or whoever looked after you, your primary caregivers when you were growing up, they may not have known how to deal with loss. They might not have been able to pass down the information that was required for you to understand. And even if they did know how to deal with loss, they might not have felt it's appropriate to explain it to a child for whatever reason. Or they were just trying to sort of say like, oh yeah, just get on with life. Like, it's okay, don't worry about that pet who's just died. We'll get another one, or something like that. Something that doesn't really validate the emotions you were going through, doesn't process that. So it's so interesting that loss can like mean so many different things and can be like compounded into this thing, so that when like the big grief, I guess, as I sort of call it, happens, we don't really know how to deal with it. And maybe we've got family members who are not, don't know how to support us in the way, or friends who don't know how to support us in the way that we kind of need, because they equally have not been taught how to deal with it. And this comes back, I guess, to the idea that people feel like if they've lost something, they should grieve. They should be in pain. They've lost something so major. They should have these feelings. And it's like, okay, well, you can have those feelings if you want to, but they're very painful. They're very destructive. They can be life-threatening to an extent, depending on how the rest of your health is going. They can set off our negative, it can have a knock-on effect on our immune system, our nervous system. It can basically just make life massively miserable for us. And it's not saying that like we should invalidate those feelings and we should forget about the people we've lost or anything like that. That's definitely not what it's about. But it's like recognizing the difference between physical pain, the pain, and thinking that we need to link that pain to the actual physical loss. Like the pain is required for us to actually be sympathetic, or like we don't want to move away from that pain because that connects us back to the person who we've lost, or any loss. And I think if you recognize that like the little losses in your life actually bring up pain for you, you can recognize that loss is all around us, grief is all around us. And once you recognize that like the little things can bring you grief, you can realize how big the big thing is bringing you grief, and it's a form of emotional and physical pain that we don't need to hang on to unless we choose to do that, because we are imagining what it was like to have that thing in our lives still, or we've not processed that change. We've not processed the fact that our reality has changed, and that's absolutely fine, because yeah, that can take time and tools and things to sort of deal with those changes and accept those changes. It's like anything in life. Physical change of an environment is like, it takes our brains time to catch up with what's happened. And if we're sitting in a basically complete disbelief and don't want to accept the change for whatever reason because it's too painful, right, like grief comes with a lot of pain, then obviously we're not going to want to think about it. We're not going to want to deal with it. Some of us might shove it down, some of us might just think like, just keep calm, carry on kind of attitude, and never truly deal with it. So yeah, so on summary, loss comes in forms of so many different things, and we can reflect on that, and it can help us to understand why we feel the way we do when grief hits us in such a way, when we have sort of big grief, so that we can understand that we can feel better from it. We don't have to feel that way just because we've experienced a major loss in our life. And we can have a look at all the other losses in our life and realize that actually, yeah, we're carrying around a lot of emotional baggage that we didn't need to. We don't need to, like relationship, even with the living, you can grieve living people, especially with relationships that have broken down. But let's say like, you have a relative or someone you don't get along very well and you wish it was a different way. How does that physically make you feel? that's a form of loss and grief. That's a form of emotional loss, because you're longing for something else. You're longing for that person to change. You're longing for the relationship to change. You're wishing it was something different, and that can cause a lot of discomfort and emotional pain. Yeah. So maybe have a reflection on what the things that are causing you these little bit of pains day to day, amongst your bigger grief. So it's an interesting one, because obviously it's a hard time to be doing this, but it's an interesting reflection. If you would like my freebie, my ebook, whatever you want to call it, I've put together like a few things from my own experiences of losing my friend, and what I thought was the most pressing things for me to know at the time, like so important, and the way that like you should never let other people make people should never be telling you how you should be grieving. I definitely believe that to be true. There's all sorts of things out there, especially if it's not helpful. I always think there's a difference between good advice and bad advice, or whatever you want to think about it. It's like, is someone else's words and feelings and things towards you positive, or is it actually unhelpful? And so hopefully there's some reflections in there for you. It's a really good, maybe I'm a bit biased, but I think it really, really helped me. There's some of the advice in there was so useful. So please message me if you would like a copy of that, and just message me or put a comment in the description, or message me the words grief sucks, because that's the name of it, because grief absolutely sucks. And so, but it's wanting to sort of think about moving away from grief, or past grief and things like this. I think that I define the definition of grief as the pain we associate with loss. So it's not the loss itself, it's the emotional pain associated with it. So yeah, so it's the grief we want to move away from, not the disconnect from the person who we've lost. I think that's a really interesting and different definition that you can think about, that it's the emotional pain you're dealing with, not the loss itself as such. Yeah, so if you want that ebook or freebie, let me know. It's absolutely free. And if any of this has been useful, please like and subscribe for more, or follow me wherever you're viewing this.